Well. Let me put it there. There we are. So it turns out that I had already started. We were almost two-thirds of the entry, and I just realized that I hadn't turned the mic on, so that one was a complete waste of time. But this one is going to be different because now I made sure that the mic is actually working. So I was explaining that today we are going back to our beautiful table that we have shared before on the BPMs. We said we would be explaining BPMs later. That later is today, is now, in fact. And BPM stands for beats per minute. That is a very standard notation, and it's supposed to be more specific than when we just have this larghissimo, grave, largo, lento, adagio, andante, moderato. And it is supposed to be because of what you're about to see now. Remember that we painted in green, yellow, and red according to whether these resources matched in what they say the range of the BPMs is for a given tempo. Today we're adding some math to it and being aware that to start with our math, we know that 60 seconds, there are 60 seconds in a minute, and the standard notation is BPMs or beats per minute. Our usually what we have is the value of a quarter, which means a quarter stands for a BPM. How many quarters in a minute depends. So you usually have this quarter equals, and when you have that, you say, then it means, 48, let's say 48, 65. And that's what is going to give you the indication. So this symbol equals a number tells you how many beats per minute, and you usually can match it to a given tempo. As we are going to see in our example, that is not always the case. So with that in mind, we are going to take a quick look at this. So because the slower we sing and using some math for the lower and the upper limit, we just divide the number or the number of seconds in a minute divided by the number of bits per minute, and that's what it's going to give you the duration of each of these quarters. So a quarter in larghissimo will be 2 seconds and a half. A quarter in largo is around a second and a half. A quarter in andante is around 0.7894736684. A quarter in allegro, it's going to be around half a second. A quarter in prestissimo is around zero point 0.3 for the lower limit. So very basic math that is going to give us the duration of each of the notes if we are going to be able to be very precise in such calculations. So with that in mind, we need to understand that I have shared with you in the past that the height of the notes or the octaves, the value, the frequency is very objective, but as in regards to the tempo, it is very subjective. Not only because of what you have seen on the chart, that the tempo largo, the range between the lower limit and the upper limit is very open, way too much open, but also because when you look at the numbers, at the math, you could say, well, that's very precise, but man, who is able to notice this level of difference of 7 or 8 decimals in a number? Truth is that we are just like around playing, right? But this is the math. People don't notice it, or people or musicians do not tend to be aware of these precise numbers because musicians can or usually have the metronome that we had talked about in the past and that I am going to show you. The one I use, I'm going to put it on the screen. First, I'm going to turn it on so that you can see it. So what you do essentially here is that you enter the value, for instance, of a quarter, and you enter the 4 by 4, the 6 by 8, or whatever it is that the notation of a given score is, and then you can start practicing. It can be, or it is very, very hard, but since musicians just look at the metronome, they lose sight of what the actual numbers of the duration of their notes is, and it can be very tricky, as you will see in our example. For our example, I chose to have Signore Ascolta, one of my favorite arias of all times, and we're going to start looking at what we have here. We have a 4 by 4, as you can read in the upper left. This area is written in a 4 by 4, as I'm sure you remember, we explained that the number in the upper means the number of notes, and the no and the lower number means the base value, which means a 4 by 4 means that we are going to have 4 notes of the value of a quarter. So we are going to have 4 of these guys in this score. Let me put it more to the right so that you can actually see it. There you go. So I was explaining, it means that since Signore Ascolta is written in a 4 by 4, we are going to have 4 notes of a quarter. If we have 4 notes of a quarter, and if we go back to the score, we notice that the tempo as expressed here, you can read it says adagio with a quarter lasting where a quarter is 50 beats per minute. If you remember, go back to our chart here, it says adagio at 50. Now it turns out from our table that the adagio is not 50. That's why I have been insisting so often that the writing of the tempo in music is highly discretional. So even though our sources agree that the adagio is 66 to 76, this score says that in fact it's more in the range of a lento without calling it a lento. So whatever. Adagio at 50. With that math in our hands, we know that if our and we run some basic math here, and that's how we gain understanding that each of our quarters is going to last 1.2 seconds. If our quarters, each of them lasts 1.2 seconds, and we have 4, because it says we have just mentioned that it's a 4 by 4, and we have 4 per each of these bars, we have 4 quarter notes in each of these bars, then that means that our bars, each of the bars lasts 4.8 seconds. We're going to run an example. Let me put it more to the center. There we go. Let me repeat it. If we have 4 of these quarters and each of these quarters lasts 1.2, then we multiply, and that's how we get 4.8 seconds per each of the bars. And our example is going to cover only 3 bars. And since we are covering only 3 bars, we know that our 3 bars should be lasting 14.4 seconds. But that is not going to be the case. You will see how. Keep this number in mind, 14.4 seconds for 3 bars. Our first example is going to be the first bar on the right, continuing to O signore, ascolta, you can. This is going to be the third bar. Go to your screen and notice that we have here 1 bar, 2 bars on the first part of the step. We go to the middle, and this is going to be the third of the example. So it is going to be where the music starts, and you start with Signore, ascolta, Signore, ascolta, Liu non. Hasta ahí, just there. Liu non. That's where our example is going to stop, and those 3 bars should be lasting 14.4 seconds. But let me share you on the screen because I want to be very visual this time with you. I am running it, of course, in a specialized program for editing audio. And these 3 bars that we talked about, look at how much they last. They last 17.9 seconds. You notice the number here in the lower part of the screen. 17.9. And we said that we were supposed to have, I just forgot the 17.9. So we are having 17.9, which means there is a variation of 3.5 seconds, around three more bars, three more quarters. It is being sung way much slower than a 50. So, Signore, ascolta, must be faster. Signore, ascolta, Signore. It is not exactly the second example, the tempo, but I just wanted to exemplify that we are used to listening to it much more slower than it is actually written. And I had shared with you in the past that singers like to do it, orchestra directors like to do it, pianists like to do it. That's why this number, the tempo, is so discretionary because it doesn't matter that it is well established that a quarter is going to be 50 seconds. We are actually going to sing it or play it as whatever it pleases to the interpreter. But we are going to run the same example for the second part. For the final part, we are going to pay attention to the last three bars. And this is going to be, if you look at the upper part, we are going to consider only the second bar, starting Apieta, where Apieta, that's the first bar, Apie, first bar, ta, second bar. And then the wrapping up of the music. Those are three bars. Agreed? Three bars. Those three bars should be lasting also 14.4 seconds. But instead of 14.4 seconds, look at how, for this example, how far we are reaching. We are reaching 27, a little less, 26, 26.95, which means that for the case of our Signore Ascolta, and we know because the soprano takes the final note for much longer, right? So it is no surprise that it is taking much longer. This is if we were, which is not the case because the three do not last the same, but if we wanted to change the tempo, we would say that we are playing at 2.55. So how do we end up it the duration that should be is 14.4, which means putting it back on the screen, it should be around here. This is where I place the line. So all this in excess is that we are playing it slower. But if you're looking at the end where we keep the note for much longer, this is the added. It is almost 50% additional playing time to what it is actually written. That's what I was criticizing the last time we talked. I mentioned it because I said, oh, those people that say, the tempo is perfect, it was just as it is written, and blah, 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 blah. Truth is that unless you run an exercise like the one I just shared with you, which is extremely time consuming, you can never say that a given, I heard the night from Beethoven and the tempo was just perfect. Unless, not a metronome, unless you have a program like this and you run all the math, you can never say that it was played at the perfect tempo. But tempo is highly discretionary, so there is no surprise that we are doing like that. So that we don't just keep with the math, let's listen at how it actually sounds. Let me put it first. the first part of the Signore Ascolta, because if we are going to use this as an example, at least let's listen to it, don't you think? And fortunately, this is not a protected recording, thanks God. So remember that we are starting from Liu non rege più a pi a. Sorry, this is not the one. This is the one. The Signore ascolta, Signore ascolta. These are the three bars. Leonon until Leonon. Until there, it's going to be our first three bars, which are supposed to last 14.4. Leonon, and that's it, our three bars. Let's go for the second example, which I know. It is in the voice of the Mexican soprano, I forgot to tell you. Irma Gonzalez, one of the most loved sopranos of the past century in Mexico. In fact, many people call her La Soprano de Mexico. She was so much loved that people liked to call her La Soprano de Mexico. And remember that three the last three bars that we are using are the final ones. Liu non rege più a pietà. Of course, the pietà, the pietà lasts much longer than written, more than the 4/4. And this is how we wrap up the tempo. I left it with the applause because, um, in fact, the duration of the last bar includes the music. So even though the clapping covers the music, it is still playing and it is still our third last bar. And the last thing that I wanted to share with you today is our model that we have been building and that maybe you have not been aware, but we have been building a model that I'm going to call the three model for score reading. And we started the first two sessions, we started talking about our first dimension, that is the note height of the frequency, and that we all already know that it is read in octaves and that it is a very objective measure. If a singer is off pitch, you can identify and it is clearly measurable. Then these three sessions we move for the second dimension, and the second dimension is the tempo, which has to do with the note duration, each of the sounds, how much they last, and we gain understanding of the BPM. We understand on the most common notations, lento, andante, allegro, etc. And we also learned a little about the duration of the notes, the value of one, a half, a quarter, 16, the 30 second, etc. And we also mentioned way too many times that this is a very discretionary dimension. We are missing one last dimension that we are going to address next week, and that dimension is going to be the volume. So, with that in mind, thank you very much for having joined me today, and